Chapter 8. Something stepped on a little stick. As soon as the twig cracked, my eyes snapped open and I was wide awake. I held my breath and kept as still as I could. Whatever it was that was sneaking up on me knew I'd woke up because it stopped moving and kept as still as it could too. Even though my head was still under my blanket, I could feel two eyes staring at me real hard, and I knew these weren't critter eyes. These eyes made the hair on the back of my neck raise up the way only human beings' eyes can do. Without wiggling or jiggling around too much under my blanket, I got my fingers wrapped around my jackknife. Right when I was ready to push the covers off of me and start running or stabbing whoever it was that had been watching, jumped right on top of me. I was as trapped as a roach under a dish rag. I tried to guess the exact spot that the person's heart was at, then pulled my knife back. A voice said, "If you ain't a kid called Bud from the home, I'm really sorry about jumping on you like this." It was Bugs! When I tried to talk, it felt like I had to suck all the air out of Flint. I finally got breathing right and said, "Doggone it, Bugs, it's me. You nearly scared me to death." He got off me and I threw the blanket over to the side. "You don't know how lucky you are. I was just about fixing to stab you in the heart." Bugs looked like he knew he'd just had a real close call. He said, "I'm sorry, Bud. I didn't mean to scare you, but everybody knows how you like to sleep with that knife open, so I figured I'd best grab holt of you so's you wouldn't wake up slicing nobody." Shucks. Even though it was Bugs, who'd come real close to getting his heart poked, I was the one who was still having trouble catching my breath. I asked, "How come you aren't back at the home?" But before he had a chance to answer, I knew. "You're on the lam." Bug said, "Yep, I'm going back to riding the rails. When I heard about you beating that kid up so bad that you had to take off, I figured it was time for me to get going too. I thought you might be hanging around the library, so I came down to see if you wanted to go with me." "Where are you heading?" "There's always fruits to be picked out west. I heard we can make enough money to get by out there. There's supposed to be a train leaving sometime tomorrow. Did you really beat that kid up in the foster home?" I said, "Uh-huh. We kind of had a fight. How long's it take to get out west?" Bug said, "Depends on how many trains you got to hop." "Was he really 2 years older than you?" "Uh-huh. He was 12. It is fun to hop a train. I'm sorry, is it fun to hop a train?" "Some of the time it is. Some of the time it's scary. We heard he was kind of big too. Was he?" I said, "He was pretty big. I can't see how we can hop on a train. They look like they're moving pretty doggone fast." Bug said, "Most times you don't hop them when they are going fast. Most times you try to climb on when it's sitting in the train yard." "Did the guy cry after you whooped him?" "Well, kind of. He looked real scared. Then told his mama to keep me away from him. They even said I was a hoodlum." We be sleeping on the train and everything?" "Sure we will. Some of the time the trains don't stop for 2 or 3 days. Man, I always try to tell people that just because someone's skinny, it doesn't mean they can't fight." "You're a hero now, Bud." "Nah, I didn't really do nothing much." "Well, how about the toilet?" How we going to use the toilet if the train doesn't stop?" Bug said, "You just kind of lean out the door and go. When the train is still moving? Yeah, you get a real nice breeze." "Oh man, that sounds great. Count me in. I can't wait." Bug spit a big glob of slob in his hand and said, "I knew I could depend on you, Bud." I spit a big glob in my hand and said, "We're brothers forever, Bugs." We slapped our hands together as hard as we could and got our slobs mixed up real good, then waved them in the air so they'd dry. Now it was official. I finally had a brother. Bug said, "We'll go down to the mission. There's bound to be someone there that knows about where we can hop this train. Then we'll be on the lam together." We found out that we'd have to go to a city called Hooperville, just outside of Flint. The only trouble was nobody knew exactly where Hooperville was. It was dark before we found out the right direction. I'd never heard of a city that was so doggone hard to find. We walked on a trail through some woods that run right right up against Thread Creek. We could tell we were getting close to Hooperville because we heard somebody playing a mouth organ and the smell of food cooking was getting stronger. We kept walking in the direction that the sky was glowing with an orangish light. When we could hear the music real clear, the folks talking to each other, and the sound of sticks cracking in a fire, we started cutting through the trees. That way we could peek into Hooperville first. We looked out from behind a big tree and saw that a big wind, or even 2 or 3 big wolves huffing and puffing real hard, could blow Hooperville into the next county. It was a bunch of huts and shacks throwed together out of pieces of boxes and wood and cloth. The Amos's shed would have looked like a real fancy house here. Right near our tree was the big fire that had been lighting up the sky. It looked like 100 people were sitting around it, watching things burn or waiting for the food cooking in 3 big pots set up in the fire. There were 2 littler fires burning in Hooperville. One had a pot that was big enough to boil a whole person in it. A man was stirring things in the pot with a big stick, and then he raised the stick up. He'd pull some breeches or a shirt out and pass it over to a white man who was hanging the clothes on a line to dry. There was a mountain of clothes on the ground next to him, waiting on their turn. The other fire in Hooperville was real small. It was off to the side by itself. There were 5 white people sitting at this fire, 2 kids, a man, and a woman holding a little wrapped up baby. The baby sounded like all those new sick babies at the home. It was coughing like it was a half-dead little animal. Bugs whispered, "Shoot, this ain't no city. This is just another cardboard jungle." "A what?" "A cardboard jungle. Somewhere you can get off the train and clean up and get something to eat without the cops chasing you out of town." I said, "Well, what are we going to do? We can't just go busting into the city and expect someone to feed us, can we?" Bug said, "One of us has to go talk to them. Let's flip for it." "Okay." Bugs rumbled around in his pocket and found a penny. He rubbed it up against his breeches and said, "Heads I win, tails you lose." "Okay." He flipped the penny up into the air and caught it, then slapped it down on the back of his left hand. He peeked under his right hand to see, and a big smile cracked his face. "Shucks," Bug said. "Tails, you lose." "Dang, so what should I say?" "Ask them if this is Hooperville. See if they got any extra food." I moved out from behind our tree and walked over toward the biggest fire. I waited until some folks noticed me, then said, "Excuse me, is this here Hooperville?" The man who was playing the mouth organ stopped, and everyone else around the fire looked up at me. One of the white men said, "What is it you looking for?" I said, "A city called Hooperville, sir." They all laughed. The mouth organ man said, "Nah, son, what you're looking for is Hooperville with a V, like in President Herbert Hoover." I said, "Oh, is this it, sir?" The man said, "This is one of them." I said, "One of them?" He answered, "They're all over the country. This here is the Flint version, and all of them are called Hooverville." That's right. Mr. Hoover worked so hard at making sure every city has got one that it seemed like it would be criminal to call them anything else. Someone said, "That's the truth." I said, "Well, how are you going to know if we're in the right one?" The mouth organ man said, "Are you hungry?" "Yes, sir." "Are you tired?" "Yes, sir." "Are you scared about what's going to happen tomorrow?" I didn't want anyone to think I was a baby, so I said, "Not exactly scared, sir, but maybe I am a little nervous." The man smiled and said, "Well, son, any place where there's other folks in need of the same things that you are is the right place to be. This is exactly the Hooverville you're looking for." I knew what the man was trying to say. This was the exact same kind of circle talking and cross talking that Mama used to do. Bugs hadn't had that kind of practice. He came from behind the tree and said, "I don't get it. You said there were Hoovervilles all over the place. What if we was looking for the Hooverville in Detroit or Chicago? How could this be the right one to be in?" The man said, "You boys from Flint?" I said, "Yes, sir." The man waved his mouth organ like a magic wand and pointed it all over the little cardboard city. "Boys," he said, "look around you." The city was bigger than I thought it was. The raggedy little huts were in every direction you looked. And there were more people sitting around than I first thought, too. Mostly it was men and big boys, but there were a couple women every now and then and a kid or two. They were all the colors you could think of, black, white, and brown, but the fire made everyone look like they were different shades of orange. There were dark orange folks sitting next to medium orange folks, sitting next to light orange folks. All these people, the mouth organ man said, are just like you. They're tired, hungry, and a little bit nervous about tomorrow. This here is the right place for y'all to be, 'cause we're all in the same boat, and you boys are nearer to home than you'll ever get. Someone said, "Amen, brother." The mouth organ man said, "It don't matter if you're looking for Chicago or Detroit or Orlando or Oklahoma City. I rode the rails to all of them. You might think, or you might hear, that things are better just down the line, but they're singing the same sad song all over this country. Believe me, son, being on the road is no good. If you two boys are from Flint, this is the right Hooverville for you." Someone said, "Brother, why don't we feed these boys? That one looks like he ain't it in 2 or 3 months." Shucks, he didn't have to point or nothing. Everyone knew who he meant. But I didn't care. The food that was bubbling up in those 3 big pots even sounded delicious. The mouth organ man said, "You're welcome to join us, but we all pitch in here, so's unless either one of you is carrying one of them smoked West Virginia hams in them bags, it looks like you'll be pulling the KP tonight." I said, "Pulling what, sir?" He said, "KP, kitchen police. You do the cleanup after everyone's had their fill. There's a couple of other young folks here who'll show you what you have to do." Me and Bugs both said, "Yes, sir." This seemed like a real good trade. A woman handed me and Bugs each a flat, square, empty tin can. "That, m'lords, is your china. Please be careful not to chip it." My china had the words "Jumbo AMP Sardine" stamped into the bottom of it. She handed us 2 beat-up old spoons and said, "Don't be shy. You two just about missed supper. You'd best hurry up." She took us over to one of the big pots and filled up our tin plates. "You're lucky," she said. "It's muskrat stew, and there's plenty left over tonight. Eat as much as you can." The stew was made out of dandelion greens and a couple of potatoes and some small wild carrots, some crawdads, and a couple of little chunks of meat. It tasted great. We both even got seconds. When we were done, the woman told us, "You boys leave your bags here. It is time to do the dishes now." "Uh-oh, ma'am. I like to keep my suitcase with me wherever I go." "I promise you your suitcase will be safe here." I remembered the Amoses had promised the same thing. I said, "You'll watch it yourself, ma'am? You'll make sure no one looks inside of it?" She said, "Son, we don't have no thieving in here. We all look out for each other." I said, "Thank you, ma'am," and put my suitcase down near the woman's feet. Me, Bugs, a little white boy, and a little girl loaded a whole mess of dirty tin cans and spoons and a couple of real plates and forks into a big wooden box and lugged them down to Thread Creek. The little girl had been in Hooverville the longest, so she got to tell the rest of us what to do. She said, "I don't suppose neither of you new boys know how to do dishes the right way, do you?" Me and Bugs had done tons of dishes in the home, so I said, "Sure we do. We used to be real good at cleaning up. Bug said, Dang, girl, you act like this is the first cardboard jungle I've been in. I know how you do dishes out here. She said, Okay then. We'll split them up and you, she pointed at Bugs and the other kid, can do half, and me and this boy can do the others. What's your name? I said Bud, not Buddy. She said, I'm Dessa Malone. Dessa handed Bugs and the other little boy some rags and some soap powder, and they started splashing the dishes in the water. Me and the girl walked a little farther up the creek and started unloading the rest of the dishes. You dry, I'll wash, she said. She handed me a rag, and just as soon as she'd splash one of the tin cans in the water and gave it to me, I'd dry it and stick it in the wooden box. She said, Where you say you're from? Flint, right here. So you and your friend come down here to get on that train tomorrow? Where's it going? Chicago, she said. Is that west from here? Uh-huh. Then, yep, that's where we're heading, I said. Where are you from? Lancaster, Pennsylvania. You going to take the train too? She said, Uh-huh, my daddy is. Folks say there's work out west, so he's going to try again. So you're going to wait here for him? Uh-huh. She was real fast at washing the dishes, but I noticed she got kind of slow and was touching my hand a lot when it came to giving them to me. She said, Where's your mama and daddy? My mother died 4 years ago. Sorry to hear that. It's okay. She didn't suffer or nothing. So where's your daddy? I think he lives in Grand Rapids. I never met him. Sorry to hear that. Shucks. She held right on to my hand when she said that. I squirmed my hand loose and said, That's okay too. Deza said, No, it's not, and you should quit pretending that it is. Who said I'm pretending anything? I know you are. My daddy says families are the most important thing there is. That's why me and my mama are going to wait together for him to come back or write for us to come to him. I said, My mother said the same thing, that families should be there for each other all the time. She always used to tell me that no matter where I went or what I did, that she'd be there for me. Even if she wasn't somewhere that I could see her, she told me. Shucks, there's some folks who will have you running your mouth before you know what you're doing. I quit talking and acted like I was having a real hard time drying the tin can she had handed me. What did she tell you, Bud? I looked at Dessa Malone and figured I'd never see her again in my life, so I kept shooting off my mouth. She would tell me everything every night before I went to sleep, that no matter what happened, I could sleep knowing that there had never been a little boy anywhere, anytime, who was loved more than she loved me. She told me that as long as I remembered that, I'd be okay. And you knew it was the truth, just as much as I know my name's Bud, not Buddy. She said, Don't you have no other kin here in Flint? No. I guess I can't blame you for wanting to ride the rails. My mama says there's poor kids on the road all alone are like dust in the wind. But I guess you're different, aren't you, Bud? I guess you sort of carry your family around inside you. Huh? I guess I do, inside my suitcase, too, she said. So you been staying in an orphanage since your mama died? What makes you say that? Well, you're kind of skinny, but I can tell by the way you talk and the way you act that you haven't been out on the road for very long. You still look young. I said, Shucks, I'm not all that young. I'm going to be 11 on November 14th, and I'm not skinny, I'm wiry. Some folks think I'm a hero. So, Mr. Hero, we're the same age, but you have been staying in an orphanage. I've been staying in a home. My daddy says being on the road ain't fit for a dog, much less a kid. How come you don't just go back to your orphanage? She started up, touching my hand too much again. Dessa Malone seemed like she was all right, so I came clean with her. Don't tell no one, but I lit out from a foster home, so I'm on the lam. And I wouldn't go back to the home even if I could. It's getting so's there's too many kids in there. So that's better than being cold and hungry all the time and dodging the railroad police? What do you mean? You don't think they just let people jump on the trains, do you? Well, I guess I hadn't thought about it. See, I knew you were too nice to have been out on the road. You're going to have a bad surprise tomorrow morning. That won't bother me too much, she said. Oh, yeah? I forgot you're a hero to some folks. When Deza smiled, a little dimple jumped up in her brown cheek. I didn't answer. I just kept drying tin cans. We got to the last 4 or 5 tin can plates, and Deza said, You ever kiss a girl at the orphanage? Uh-oh. Are you kidding? No. Why? You afraid of girls? You must be kidding. She said, Okay, and closed her eyes and mushed her lips up and leaned close to me. Dangy, if I didn't kiss her, she'd think I was scared of girls. If I did kiss her, she might blab or bugs might see me and tell strangers about what happened. I looked down the creek to where Bugs and the other boy were still splashing in the water. It was dark enough that I didn't think he could see us too good. I scooched my lips up and smashed my face on Deza Malone's. We stuck like that for a hot second, but it felt like a long time. When I opened my eyes and pulled back, Deza kept hers closed and smiled. She looked down and stuck her hand in mine again, and this time I let her keep it there. She looked out at the creek and the woods on the other side and said, Isn't this romantic? I looked out to see what she was talking about. The only thing I could see was the moon, like a big egg yolk way up in the sky. You could hear the water and the sound of the mouth organ man playing a sad song back in Hooverville. I sneaked another peek at Deza's dimple. She said, You hear that? That's Shenandoah. He's playing. Isn't it pretty? I guess so. Do you know the words? Uh-huh. Listen. It's been 7 long years since last I've seen her. Way hey, you rollin' river. Been 7 long years since last I've seen her. Way hey, I'm bound away. Cross the wide Missouri. I said, Yep, that's a sad song. I didn't think it was pretty at all. She squeezed my hand and said, Isn't it? It's about an Indian man and woman who can't see each other for 7 years. But in all of that time, they still stay in love, no matter what happens. It reminds me of my mother and father. Your dad's been gone for 7 years before? She looked out over the creek like the big eggy moon had her hypnotized. I pulled my hand from hers and said, Well, that's just about it for the dishes. She smiled again. Bud, I'll never forget this night. I didn't tell her, but I probably wouldn't forget it either. I'd practiced on the back of my hand before, but this was the first time I'd ever busted slob with a real live girl. We loaded all the dishes in the box and walked down to Bugs and the other kid. We put their dishes on top of ours and headed back. Bugs said, How come you're looking so strange, Bud? You look like you've been chunked in the head with a rock. Deza Malone laughed, and for a second I thought she was going to rat me out. I said, I don't know. I guess that song is making me kind of sad. Bugs said, Yeah, it is kind of sad. Right before we got into the cardboard jungle, we passed the white people with the coughing baby at their own little fire. I said to Deza, How come they're off alone? They aren't allowed to sit around the big fire 'cause that baby making so much noise? Deza said, Uh-huh. They've been invited, but my daddy said you gotta feel sorry for them. All they're eating is dandelion green soup, and they're broke. Their clothes are falling off of them. Their baby's sick, but when someone took them some food and blankets, the man said, Thank you very much, but we're white people. We ain't in need of any handouts. When we got back in the main fire of Hooverville, we put the dishes in another box. Deza made us turn them all upside down so if the rain got into them, they wouldn't rust. I went to the woman with my suitcase. It was in the same spot I had left it, and the knots in the twine were the kind I tie. I said, Thank you very much, ma'am. She said, I told you not to worry. I went back to the big fire to sit with Bugs. The mouth organ man said, I suppose you boys are going out on the train tomorrow. I said, The one for Chicago, sir? He said, That's the one. I said, Yes, we are, sir. He said, well, you'd best get as much sleep as you can. It's supposed to be pulling out at 5:15, but you never know with these freights. We got in one of the shacks with some other boys. Bugs was snoring in 2 seconds, but I couldn't sleep. I opened my jackknife and put it under my blanket. I was thinking, Deza's mom was right. Someone who doesn't know who their family is like dust blowing around in a storm. They don't really belong any one place. I started wondering if going to California was the right thing to do. I might not know who my family was, but I knew they were out there somewhere, and it seemed to make a whole lot of more sense to think that they were somewhere around Flint instead of out west. I opened my suitcase to get my blanket. Even though I trusted the women who'd guarded it for me, I checked to make sure everything was okay. I picked up the tobacco pouch that had my rock in it and pulled the drawstring open. I shook the 5 smooth stones out and looked at them. They'd been in the drawer after the ambulance took Mama away, and I had them ever since. Some had took a pen or something and had writ on all 5 of them, but it was written a code so I couldn't understand what that meant. One of them said, Kentland Ill 5.10.11. Another said, Lugo T in 5.16.11. Then there was Sturgis M 8.30.12 and Gary in 6.13.12, and the last one said Flint M.8.11.11. I put them back in their pouch and pulled the string tight. Then I pulled out the envelope that had the picture of the saggy pony at the misbegotten moon park. It was fine. Next, I counted the flyers again. All 5 were there. I slid all of them back except for the blue one. I held it up so it could catch some of the light from the big fire. I kept looking at the picture and wondering why this one bothered Mama so much. The more I thought about it, the more I knew this man just had to be my father. Why else would Mama keep these? I used a little trick to help me fall off to sleep. I pulled my blanket right up over my head and breathed in the smell real deep. After doing this 3 times, the smells of the shack in Hooverville were gone, and only the smell of the blanket was in my nose. And that smell always reminded me of Mama and how she used to read me to sleep every night. I took 2 more breaths and pretended I was hearing Mama reading to me about a billy goat gruff, or the fox and the grapes, or the dog that saw his reflection in the water, or some other story she'd checked out of the library. I could hear Mama's voice getting farther and farther away as I imagined I was in the story, until finally her voice and the story all mixed into one. I learned that it was best to be asleep before Mama finished the story, because if she got done and I was still awake, she'd always tell me what the story was about. I never told Mama, but that always ruined the fun of the story. Shucks. Here I was thinking I was just hearing something funny about a fox or a dog, and Mama spoiled it by telling me they were really lessons about not being greedy or not wishing for things you couldn't have. I took 2 more breaths and started thinking about the little hen that baked the bread. I heard, "Not I," said the pig. "Not I," said the goat. "Not I," said the big bad wolf. When whoop zoop loop, I was asleep. I started dreaming about the man with the giant fiddle. He was walking away and I kept calling him, but he couldn't look back. Then the dream got a lot better. I turned away from where Herman E. Calloway was, and there stood Deza Malone. I told her, "I really like your dimple." She laughed and said, "See you in 7 years." I'm going to stop it there and then record the next half.